I've made a lot of bad choices. I've made a lot of mistakes. Done bad things to people. Mostly ones who deserved it, but also people who didn't. The ones who loved me. You want to know the real reason I wear the mask? It's so I don't have to look myself in the face. Today on the Comic Book Report, Moon Knight by Jed MacKay Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared yet another Marvel Omnibus review for all of you. This is reviewing a more recent Marvel release. This book came out in the recent months. Yes, this is Jed MacKay's Moon Knight run. I did release a short first look at this book. I think I also released an unboxing, but I knew when I ordered this that this would be one I had to review on the channel. This book was an absolute page turner for me. It was really hard to put down and I just devoured it. Can't wait to talk about it today, but before we do, I'd like to shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, perhaps this book if it's still in print, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can actually find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything on that website you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's probably the best way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's Omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Jed MacKay and penciled primarily by Alessandro Cappuccio and Federico Sabatini. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2021. As far as what this omnibus collects, it includes Moon Knight, the 2021 series, issues 1 through 30, Devil's Reign Moon Knight Annual 2022, issue 1, and material from Avengers, the 2018 series, issue 45, and Moon Knight Annual 2023, issue 1. And finally, this is an oversized hardcover edition with nice glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 848 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at today's omnibus collection. I'll say right from the jump that I have the standard edition cover that has art here from Greg Capullo. There is a direct market cover as well for this omnibus. I'll go ahead and throw up a quick thumbnail just so you can compare the two. Honestly, both covers look absolutely striking, but I couldn't turn down the Greg Capullo cover, him landing on the moon like that. I just think it's absolutely gorgeous, epic, evocative. I just had to have it. The spine design for this particular omnibus as well I found to be quite striking. We have the stylized Moon Knight logo underneath the Marvel Omnibus logo, of course, and it's on this interesting kind of purple to black field, which is really nice. And of course we have an image of Moon Knight at the bottom. I will say for the direct market cover, I believe that image will also be a bit different, but other than that and the cover itself, both editions should be identical. On the back of the omnibus, we have a great image of Moon Knight under the moon, a blurb about the book, descriptions, what it contains, pricing information, things like that. The usual bells and whistles here. I love the art direction for this omnibus. All the graphic design here looks absolutely riveting. I really like it. I actually think it's one of the best looking omnibuses released this year. Now I do want to spend a minute just looking at this dust jacket again. I'm going to go ahead and open it all up. You can see the interior flaps. I'll spread it all out so you can see it all at a glance. And after that, we'll transition over to the hardback book itself. We'll take a look at the art printed on that. And honestly, like I said, I just think this book is gorgeous. I think all the images they chose are just really stellar. I love this standard edition cover though. The Greg Capullo art, again, it's just chef's kiss. I don't think I've seen much better on an omnibus cover in a while. I adore it. best. Switching over to the hardback book, we do have this kind of ethereal and sinister looking Moon Knight image that's on the wraparound here. It's a full wraparound hardback design. This is lifted from one of the issues earlier on in the collection. They removed the text, so we just have this kind of ghoulish image of the Moon Knight. Again, really striking, and I just think it looks really dynamic and interesting, and it definitely adds a lot of flavor to this already beautiful collection. Really cannot say how much I love the exteriors of this book. And now for all you prospective collectors out there, I want to do a quick look at the binding for this omnibus. Like I said, it is a sewn binding, and my copy has a beautiful eye. This book lays nearly flat with very minimal gutter loss. I couldn't be more happy with it, and this is after only one reading. Really good stuff here, one of the best bound omnibuses I've had in the collection in a little while. Okay, and as we make our way into the collection proper, after the black end pages, we have a title page, followed immediately by the creator breakdown page, which shares its page with the publication information. On the other page, we have the beginning of that Jed MacKay run with issue 1. Yes, we jump right into the meat and potatoes of this run, and it's so much fun. However, I'd like to go ahead and set up a couple things, some questions you might be asking, such as, is this run new reader friendly? I want to start and just say yes, absolutely. I think, in my opinion, this is a great run for new readers who really don't know much at all about Moon Knight and want to get introduced to him. With one notable caveat, and that is that this comes after an event called Age of Khonshu, which I believe was a Jason Aaron written Avengers run. I haven't read that personally, but a big plot point that happens toward the end of that, and again, minor spoilers here, but it affects the very beginning of this run. Khonshu, the kind of moon creature that basically gives Mark his powers, is imprisoned by presumably Moon Knight or the Avengers. Anyway, he's kind of off the board, so Mark Spector is a totally free agent in this series. But anyway, other than that, I don't think you really need to know a ton. Moon Knight is a character who has dissociative identity disorder, the multiple personality disorder. Basically, he has different personas or aspects to his personhood. He's a character as well who's kind of maybe empowered by this moon creature. He's come back to life a few times. He has a really dark past. He's a street level vigilante, and again, other than that, you kind of just dive right in. One of the things that Jed MacKay does earlier in this run too is establish a kind of frame narrative device for his storytelling, which is that Moon Knight is kind of undergoing therapy sessions with a therapist. We get this feeling right away that this is kind of mandated by the Avengers after the Age of Khonshu, but it provides a really cool exposition and narrative shell for a lot of the storytelling we get here. It's not overdone, and honestly, the therapist herself has a ton of agency. She's a character that becomes part of the supporting cast, and I think that this was a really novel approach within Jed MacKay's just kind of whole vibe here. It just really worked well for me. But we set up with this kind of therapist session. She's asking him questions. He's kind of revealing a little bit about his state and what he's up to, and we find out that he has opened something he's called the Midnight Mission. Now, this isn't exactly a private eye firm. It's more of a refuge for those travelers at night that are under his protection, and it's his way to help those in need on his streets. And it's not before long that he gets pulled into some conflict with some vampires that are basically going rogue. They're sort of a rogue vampire order that's turning a bunch of young adults into the undead. Now, Moon Knight dispatches them rather quickly, but he deems some of these newly turned vampires effectively innocent or victims of what had been done to them. He actually takes one of them on in his Midnight Mission as basically an assistant at first, but ultimately an ally and friend and confidant. This was a really cool character and his first kind of supporting cast character. I do believe Jed MacKay came up with this character, but again, it's just really fun. Another character that's introduced earlier on in this run is the character of Hunter's Moon. Now, this is a character that we find out right away is actually the other fist of Khonshu, and unlike Mark Spector, he does not have dissociative identity disorder. And so part of the lore that Jed MacKay builds here is that essentially all the fists of Khonshu have a shared kind of ancestral memory of the other fists, and they have kind of a downloaded training when they first become the fists of Khonshu. But Mark, because he already had other voices in his head, presumably, becomes a kind of fractured vessel for Khonshu, so he never received that training. So initially, Hunter's Moon and the Moon Knight are at odds, they battle, they are really not getting along, but over time they become uneasy allies and ultimately friends and finally brothers. Hunter's Moon is a really great character and really helps fill out this kind of team Moon Knight that we get throughout MacKay's run. Another character we get pretty early on is Tigra, or the Return of Tigra. This is one of his associates from the Avengers West Coast, one of the kind of vigilante heroes in the West Coast Avengers. She's ultimately put in play, we find out, as a plant for T'Challa, the Black Panther, to keep eyes additionally on Moon Knight beyond just the therapy sessions. But Tigra really has a lot of care and compassion toward Mark Spector. He is really a friend of hers, and we get to see a really beautiful friendship and relationship kind of continue to just bloom and flourish throughout this run. And honestly, this is one of the novel approaches to this book that I liked, is that Jed MacKay kind of created an ensemble book. Like, you think it's just going to be Moon Knight or all the personalities that Moon Knight has, but really it's this beautiful supporting cast of characters. And a lot of these characters were made up by Jed MacKay. A couple, like in the case of Tigra, were kind of pulled in from the past and just utilized by him. But it's a really fun book. I wouldn't necessarily call it a teen book, although at times it feels that way, because they all go out from the Midnight Mission and kind of try to right wrongs. There's also this kid that used to belong to Hydra and is now kind of pledged himself and his service and even his life over to Moon Knight after he kind of saved him and saved his mom. But yeah, overall, a really eclectic and fun group of characters. I actually think this is what Jed MacKay maybe does best in this run, is just, it's so character driven. I find myself caring about each and every one of his supporting cast of characters, and that's no easy feat. I think it's a really commendable act, and I really, really loved it. We also have beautiful artwork from Cappuccio throughout this omnibus. We have a couple other illustrators, but I think Cappuccio is safely the artist for this Moon Knight run, and the art is just absolutely stunning. I think for me, this is just some of my favorite modern Marvel art I've seen recently. It has a kind of just modern polish to it that I don't often see. There's a lot of just angular design work. I love what they do for especially Mr. Knight, the kind of Moon Knight in a suit persona. We have this kind of like white glare effect that makes it look like he's glowing in every scene he's in, and I don't even know how they achieve this, but it's just really amazing. It's eye-popping, and it jumps right off the page. So we're jumping around already a little bit. I've talked a bit about the setup, the characters, the writing, and some of the art. But let me go ahead and just jump over to some of my favorite story beats in this omnibus. So like I said, early on, he kind of dispatches some vampires and begins to set up his supporting crew and characters that ultimately help him in his midnight mission. And honestly, that is really what this book centralizes on. He has this mission, and he tries to help those that travel at night. And honestly, I really like it. I really like this approach to this character. I think it was a fun way to just do a new spin for Moon Knight. Another thing I liked is that early in this run, you don't really get the other personas. You just have Mark Spector and you have Moon Knight. And even when he's acting as Moon Knight, you get the feeling that this is just Mark. It's always just Mark. To the point where I wondered, how much are they going to lean into that dissociative identity disorder? Will we see some of Mark Spector's other personas like Jake Lockley or Stephen Grant? Well, it wasn't too long before that question was answered for me. We basically have him have maybe something like a psychological break, where ultimately we realize that Mark Spector made a deal with his other personas saying, hey, our life is really turned upside down. We try to take over the world in the pages of Avengers, for crying out loud. You guys need to take the back seat. You need to let me drive the car for a while, and I'll get our life on track. But when that fails tremendously in these early issues of Moon Knight, Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley kind of confront Mark, and they're basically saying, your plan isn't working, and in fact, the reason you're getting beaten down by your enemies is because you're working at basically 1/3 strength. We are all part together that makes Moon Knight, and to just basically diminish or silence part of us is to silence part of you and what makes us all effective. So he lets loose some of his other personas, and this ultimately gets out to like his associate, the vampire girl. He keeps it as kind of a guarded secret, not wanting her to know how unstable he is, but ultimately she actually welcomes him warmly, understanding more of him. And this is a really fun point in the Moon Knight book. We actually have a whole issue that while Moon Knight's fighting this big bad villain that's kind of vying to assassinate him, or maybe a couple villains, he's having this whole internal dialogue with his different personas. It's honestly one of my favorite issues in this omnibus. I think it was a really fun way to roll in these other personalities, kind of introduce them to presumably some new readers out there in a way that felt palatable and interesting. As someone who's dabbled with Moon Knight in the past, I was really happy and just excited to see some of these other characters introduced in Moon Knight's psyche for this run. Another great issue that I like, or kind of great sequence of issues, is that we have this sort of who is the big bad, who's ultimately pulling the strings, who's behind all of this, and it kind of drives Moon Knight mad. He's trying to figure out who's kind of behind sort of the assassinations of some of his friends, or some of the dark dealings that are happening in his neighborhood. And honestly, that becomes kind of a quest line or storyline arc for a lot of his midnight mission. And honestly, throughout a lot of the omnibus, we're trying to figure out who is pulling the strings. We find one guy pulling the strings, but then there's a bigger shadow guy kind of doing something even more. And I like that. There was a lot of just intrigue and whodunit kind of stuff in this omnibus that I didn't expect, and I liked it. We got to see Moon Knight kind of play detective in many ways, but we also got to see him just do what he does best, which is honestly violently brutalize a lot of criminals. We also have a lot of great, I call them kind of 80s movies action lines, where we have Moon Knight just deliver these amazing just one-shot lines that are just brutal. Like, he talks to people, he basically just threatens people in really, really visceral language, and you really start to remember how dark some incarnations of Moon Knight are. I think for the most part, Jed MacKay keeps this kind of above the depths that this character can kind of go to, but he definitely teeters on that line sometimes. You get just enough of that kind of darkness, edge, violence that you might want as a Moon Knight fan, but we never go to the depths that we go to in some of the runs I've read, like partially at least, like the Houston run or some of the Warren Ellis stuff that just gets really bloody for bloody's sake sometimes. But yeah, there's still a lot of violence and intensity in this book, so if you are looking for that, definitely be aware there is some. But again, I don't think he goes too far. Another plot element I like that's introduced some point, maybe middle of the book, we basically have this sort of alternate dimension space, basically this room that is like a sentient creature that Moon Knight and his team kind of grapple with, and ultimately it's decided that this guy is going to join forces with him and become the physical building for the Midnight Mission after it was blown up or destroyed in an early story arc. I really like this because the Midnight Mission itself becomes a character that has a lot of agency and is used to fight bad guys throughout this run. There's times where people enter the Midnight Mission and Moon Knight basically is just like, get them, and it basically warps itself and messes with them or tortures them or just plays with their mind. And I thought this was a really interesting wrinkle. It's like if the Batcave had a personality. We have an issue in here as well that's sort of the Devil's Reign Marvel event tie-in for Moon Knight, where he basically is in prison and gets in a prison brawl. We find out that he put himself there to help one of the people that came to his Midnight Mission, and it's just a really gnarly issue. We have a different series artist for that issue. I did read that issue already when I reviewed that omnibus on the channel some time ago, but that was a fun inclusion in here. While that was happening, we actually had Hunter's Moon kind of leading the issue in the main Moon Knight run, which I thought was fun. Basically says, you know, like Mark Spector's in prison, so Hunter's Moon's kind of taken over here at the Midnight Mission. But yeah, it's a really fun omnibus. You know, there's a lot of story elements I'm leaving out. I will jump around and talk about a few more that I enjoyed. We basically have this kind of grouping of vampires. We basically have this sort of pyramid scheming vampire trying to make his way up the hierarchy of vampires and trying to take over New York. And ultimately, Moon Knight's like, yeah, we're going to stop these guys. So he breaks into a kind of vampire auction space and tries to dispatch a bunch of vampires. He ultimately makes a holy water blessed sprinkler system that completely eviscerates this vampire horde. We also have him teaming up with other vampires at different points. So if you like Marvel vampires, this run has a lot of fun stuff in it. Talking briefly about the overall feel of this book, I think that there are some highs and lows, but honestly, the valleys aren't that low for me. There's some issues that are more riveting than others, but even the issues I liked least in this omnibus, I still thought were thoroughly entertaining. This book was so hard for me to put down. Before getting this omnibus, I had read the first handful of issues in the first paperback collection. I think I reviewed that at the end of 2023, but then shortly after that, I heard the omnibus was coming out, so I actually sold that collection, and I was just waiting to finish the run. The only other issue I think I read before picking up this omnibus, again, was that Devil's Reign tie-in issue, but the rest of this was totally blank slate for me. I had no idea what happened here. I know now, after I finished reading this, that Jed MacKay has gone on to write the Vengeance of Moon Knight series that takes place after the events of this book. So that's something as well, is that Jed MacKay is still writing Moon Knight content. It just occurs after this first batch of runs. I think another thing that Jed MacKay did for Moon Knight is he expands the lore of the Moon Knight kind of universe and characters. You know, we're introduced to other fists of Khonshu like Hunter's Moon. We have this idea of ancestral memory and previous fists, which I really liked. There's also this idea that, yes, Moon Knight has come back from the dead a couple times, largely due to what Khonshu does, but now that Khonshu is imprisoned, we basically find out that his ability to bring people back is waning. And we actually find out every time a Moon Knight is brought back, they're diminished somehow. Some of their soul maybe doesn't come back. And so a lot of times when Moon Knights basically end and join the other fists, they basically mad, or they've lost big parts of themselves. So we actually have Hunter's Moon at one point die and come back, and he feels diminished somehow. He feels lesser. And he comes with a message basically saying that Khonshu can't help them anymore. The next time they die for real. So that's kind of hanging over the series as well about halfway through, and in many ways this feels sort of like the ticking clock kind of convention. You really have the sense of stakes and almost foreshadow basically saying, if we die now, it's over. No one's going to help us. And again, this is a spoiler review, so here we go. We ultimately get to see that resolve toward the climax of this collection near the end, where Mark Spector tries to take down the big bad one last time. Basically, he has this idea to basically corrupt all of New York City, and it's up to Moon Knight and his team to stop him. And they go through this building, they try to take down the bad guys and get to the final kind of, I call it the boss level, right? Like the penthouse suite where the boss is about to enact his plan and just take over New York and destroy people. And ultimately it's Moon Knight versus this villain, someone from his past. And Moon Knight basically has to do the ultimate sacrifice, and he is not coming back, at least not in the pages of this omnibus. But I think it was a really good kind of swan song for this run. I thought it was really earned and really just amazing. We do have the Midnight Mission going on outside of Mark Spector, and that's where this whole run kind of lands, and that's presumably where the vengeance of Moon Knight picks up, is with the supporting cast of characters, this team Midnight Mission that Jed MacKay helped instill. I think that's where that follow-up series goes, even without Mark Spector at the helm, at least initially. And honestly, I'm pretty eager to read that next run because this one was so deeply satisfying. Overall, just a brilliant run. I know my review right now has been a little bit all over the place, but I hope you followed and enjoyed with me. This has been such a treat. Honestly, I burned through this book so fast, I feel like I can talk about it for hours. But for right now, we're actually getting toward the end of this book. We have a great little afterword at the back of the collection, followed by an extensive variant cover art gallery with just some of the most beautiful artwork I've seen recently. One of the things I loved is that most of this variant cover art gallery does full page reprints of those covers. And then toward the end of the gallery, we do have some kind of thumbnails where they maybe do like 4 issues per page. But yeah, it's an extensive variant cover art gallery. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. I think it's amazing to see some of the creators that came out to do some variants for them. And I just love how much we get collected in this omnibus. I think it's just amazing, and I love that that's how they ended this collection. Well, they ended it with like a brief little blip of, I think, an Avengers issue for like a page or two, but that's really how it ends. And honestly, yeah, ton of fun here. I think it's safe to say I'm becoming a fan of Jed MacKay. I started reading MacKay by reading the first couple issues of this Once Upon a Time. Then I went on to read the entire run on Black Cat in that Black Cat omnibus, which I also really enjoyed. And now I'm back here finishing out this first omnibus, and honestly, I can't wait to check out Vengeance of Moon Knight and some of his other work. In fact, if you have other Jed MacKay titles outside of this Moon Knight run and Black Cat that you'd like to recommend, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But for right now, we've made it to the end of our omnibus. This is the Moon Knight Omnibus by Jed MacKay, recently released from Marvel Comics, an absolute gem. And I think all that's left to do now is to give this collection a grade. I doubt it'll come to the surprise of anyone after you've heard me gush for 20 minutes about this title, but the Comic Book Report is happy to give Moon Knight by Jed MacKay Omnibus an A. This was an absolutely page-turning omnibus read. It was hard to put down. Absolutely character-driven, some really fun mystery, whodunit, a lot of great action, a lot of great quips and one-liners, and some really moving features as well. The art we had from Cappuccio throughout this book is unbelievably beautiful. I don't even think my filming is doing it justice, but this really delivered on all fronts for me. I think I'm more invested with the character of Moon Knight now than before picking up this omnibus, and I'm eager to see what's in store for the character in the future. I enjoyed Lemire's run, but this is maybe a contender for one of the top Moon Knight runs I've read. But I'd love to get your opinion. Have you read Jed MacKay's Moon Knight? What do you think about it? Let me know all that in the comments, and thanks everyone for coming out and watching. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, a comment, and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks everyone, have a good one.